Um, can anybody name that first judge? Let's really think really hard. You may have to kneel down to think about it. You may need to pray, be on your knee. You may need to kneel down to remember the first judge. Anybody remember the name of that first judge? Othniel, all right. The second judge was not Robin Hood. That's why I remember the second judge. He's not Robin Hood. Who's the second judge? Othniel, Ehud, and then the fellow's only got 2 verses in the Bible, and it's a shame. It's almost a sham that he only gets 2 verses, and his name is Shamgar. Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, and then Deborah. I want you to try to memorize the names of the judges, and if we'll work on it every week, we're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I put the names on the board. Just try to learn those first 4. Anybody know the one, Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar? Anybody know the one who comes after Deborah? All right, there's Gideon, and then Gideon's son, Abimelech, and then the 3 guys we know nothing about, right? That's Tola, Jair, and the third guy we know something about, Jephthah. There's quite a bit in the Bible about Jephthah. In fact, he gets mentioned over in Hebrews chapter 11 as a very righteous man, and he is the man of the Bible who offered a sacrifice to God. Now, there were others who offered their children to pagan gods, but here's a man who offered his daughter as a sacrifice to God, Jephthah. Othniel, Shamgar, Tola, Jair, Jephthah. And then the other 3 guys, and you just need to memorize these names as one name, and that is, I can't get this thing to advance. What am I doing wrong? Okay. Why will it not advance? Okay, there it is. And that is Ibzan, Elon, Abdon, and then you got Samson, Eli, and Samuel. So please be working on those names. The last 3 you know. Strong man, Samson. Old man, Eli. And the last of the judges is Samuel. So if you got Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, and Gideon, and then you got these last 3, you've got 8 out of the 15. I tried to convince my mom that a D was a pretty good grade for me. And so if you can get 8 out of 15, you're almost there. And so I just want to encourage you to try to learn the names of they're not on the final test to get into heaven, but it really will help you to have a grasp of the judges. And so here's the thing we've talked about, is about the clock of the judges. And we've talked about it several times. At what word would you put up at the 12 o'clock place up there? When you talk about the clock of the judges, what word is up there? Well, the judges start off with all of these guys being faithful to God. And so up at the 12 o'clock point on the clock of the judges, and this is just sort of a way of trying to help us remember that, you've got the fact that they were faithful to God. Well, you're faithful to God, what happens? Well, think about the 3 o'clock session, and that is they turn to idols. When they turn to idols, what's God's reaction? Well, God's reaction is He's going to allow those nations to come around and oppress them. And that's the story of the judges. It's like the hands of a clock going around the clock. Faithfulness, idolatry, oppression, and then there is that matter of repentance where they repent, turn back to God, and God raises up a judge, raises up a deliverer. And so that's the thing we've talked about. And if you can get that, you'll be able to grab 350 years of Jewish history right there. Because if you can see that hands running around that clock from 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock, it's very logical. Faithfulness, unfaithfulness, oppression, deliverance. It's just, if you understand the nature of God in relationship to the judges. And so what we have done is we've tried to look at these first 3 judges, and we're going to hopefully get to Shamgar tonight. I'm not for sure we'll get there, but we're going to do everything we can. So we've got Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar all covered tonight. So the first 3 chapters that are there. and we've got that map of the way the land was divided among the Jews, and we'll be looking at that again in just a moment. Then the name of that first judge was what? Othniel. The second judge? Ehud. Third judge? Shamgar, and the fourth judge is Deborah. So try to grab a hold of those. There's Othniel. What do you know about Ehud? Well, you heard me say his name is not Robin Hood. That came out of a Pew Packers class, and I've mentioned this, but some are here tonight who were not here other times when I've mentioned it. I was in a gospel meeting just on the west side of Atlanta several years ago, probably 35. Yeah, well, the little boy is now a deacon in the church, so it was perhaps more than 35 years ago, and a little Pew Packers class, Bible drills with the children, and I told them the story about Ehud, which is the story we're going to talk about tonight, and I said, now who is this man? And we called him the left-handed judge. And the next night, I just went through the questions. You know, what's the greatest book in the world? How many books in the Bible? How many books in the Old Testament? How many books in the New Testament? Who was the first man? Who built the ark? Who was the father of the Jewish nation? And man, they were just popping those answers off. And I'm just going chronologically through the Bible. And I got over to the matter of the judges, and I said, "And who was the left-handed judge?" And little boy raised his hand, was waving his hands real big, and I called on him, and he said, it was not Robin Hood. And that's right, it's not Robin Hood, it's Ehud. And I owe to a little 3-year-old boy the way of remember the left-handed judge. By the way, anybody left-handed, if you're here tonight, raise your hand. Should I say, see, left-handed people raise their left hand. I don't know if you can know that, but sometimes figure out who left-handed people are. They tend to raise their left hand. Or by the way, do you know that left-handed people don't know how to clap? Have you ever noticed the difference in the way right-handed people? You haven't noticed that, Joe? Joe, just clap. Just clap. Amy, clap. Amy, clap. Left-handed people put the left hand on top. I don't know if you noticed that or not, but normal people clap with your right hand on the top. We're clapping in church. And now you got the left-handed people clapping with their left hand on top. And if you're wiring straight, you'll have your right hand on top, I guess. And that means left-handed people are their mind's not attached properly in relationship to that. Now then, we've talked about, we're going to talk about this, and that is the meaning of the names. And not every name has meaning necessarily, but Ehud's name means he that praises. You know, we name our children, and we name our children after grandfathers, name our children after relatives, name our children after friends we've had in the past. Not necessarily. But there's something about that name that we are trying to transfer. Maybe it's just notoriety. I'm not sure exactly what it is. But trying to transfer into that child some concept of that. And if we've done that, it's all likelihood we've told our children, well, let me tell you where you got your name. Let me tell you about, and then we talk about that grandfather or that uncle or that best friend they had in high school, and that's why we gave you this name. And this was, in Bible study, I find it often fascinating to just look up the meaning of Bible names. I don't know if there's any significance to this at all. Here's a little boy that grew up, and every time they called his name, it meant this is a boy that praises, and I'm assuming praises God. And all through his life, every time he heard that word, it's a Hebrew word, and the meaning of the Hebrew word is he that praises. Does anybody remember the name that was given by the mother of that little boy? She wanted to have a child, and she kept praying that she might have a child. And she prayed and prayed. In fact, the old priest, Eli, says she thought she was drunk. And finally she had the child, and what'd she name the child? Asked of God is the name she gave him. That's the English name, the English meaning of the name, and that's Samuel. Can you imagine being Samuel? And I was praying and praying. And why'd you name me Samuel, Mom? Why did you name me Samuel? Because we prayed to God, and God gave us you as a child. Ask of God. I sort of like that. Elijah. Jah is the word Jehovah. Eli, my God is Jehovah. That's a whole lot better than the nickname you got in the first grade when they called you, what'd they call you?
Shorty.
Shorty? Fatty? Dummy? I don't know what, do you have a nickname? Judy's dad, he called Judy Stinky. I'm not even sure where that name came from. And don't tell Judy I said that. I sure hope she's not listening right now. Don't you? And if you tell her that's what you heard, don't you tell her where you heard it from. But I just remember this first time I went over and I met my father-in-law. And isn't it funny? You don't know what to call your father-in-law to be. Did you have that same problem that I had? It's the nicknames that people have. Joe has a nickname. It's one that came out of the military. Are you aware that Joe fought for the United States Army as a boxer? Was it the Army, Joe? And they gave him a name. Now I want you to just think about this. It's a fabulous nickname for Joe Holland. They called him Horizontal Holland. and that's better than Shorty. At least you were trying, right? No, he had 3 matches and won all 3 of them, right? Had 4 matches and won all 4 of them. And so I guess it's in laughing they gave him the name Horizontal Holland. But that's remarkable. But nicknames. Here's a little boy growing up, and his name means he that praises. Now then, when we read about Ehud, he's raised up by God. Remember on the cycle of the judges? Othniel is dead. People have turned to idols. And they are being oppressed by the Moabites. What do we know about the Moabites? Can you see where they are on the map up there? I don't know if you can see the map clear enough, but right there is where Moab is. So here's Israel up here in the Promised Land, and that's where Moab is. In fact, sometimes evidently their land even went up into this area here, up into that area, because before they crossed over the Jordan River, they were in the plains of Moab, and so that's the land down there is not greatly mountainous where Moab is, and so it's described as the plains of Moab. So what's happened? They become unfaithful to God. And because they become unfaithful to God, God allows the Moabites to come up and to oppress the people of God. Now, Eglon is their king. And so when we begin to look at Eglon, we need to understand that he brought real oppression on the Jews. The word tribute is used. We understand tribute, do we not? But can you imagine how oppressive giving all of the riches that you had over to the Moabites? It's rather interesting, if you'll read it carefully, that it was not just the Moabites, but the Amorites were also involved in it. And so you've got the Amorites and you've got the Moabites. Now, does anybody have any idea where the Moabites come from? Where do the Amorites or the Ammonites come from? I said Amorites. I probably should have said Ammonites. Where do they come from? If I talk about remember Lot's wife, and by the way, that's one of those short verses in the Bible. At the West Huntsville congregation, we had a 5 o'clock Sunday afternoon class, and it was all, from 6 years old all the way up to 30. I mean, it was just a young people's class, and there might have been some older people in there, but it was really for the young people. And everybody in the class had to start off by quoting a verse. And somebody got Jesus wept. I mean, you had to be sitting on the front row where they started to get Jesus wept. And so I memorized some great verses, like there was great joy in that city. Nobody in that class knew Acts chapter 8. It took me about 2 hours to keep looking through the Bible to find those short verses, and I wanted one nobody else had. And so Acts 8:8, there was great joy in that city. What about Luke 17:32? One verse, remember Lot's wife. They were in Sodom and Gomorrah. And whenever they left Sodom and Gomorrah, they were actually pulled out forcefully by those angelic beings that were there. And whenever they left that place, they went down. Lot prays, spare, and he names the city by name. God had already intended to destroy not just Sodom and Gomorrah. There were other cities, by the way, other than Sodom and Gomorrah that were destroyed. But he asked that God would spare that city. As I recall the name of that city, it was Zoar, Z-O-A-R. I maybe have the wrong name for that city. Please spare that city. And so Lot and his 2 daughters go to that city, and they decide that Lot needs to have children and that his name and his genealogy be on this earth. So they got him drunk one night. And one of the daughters went in and became pregnant from Lot. The next night, a second daughter. They got him drunk again. And the second daughter went in and had an incestuous relationship with her father. And the results of that was the Moabites and the Ammonites. It's rather interesting that those 2 names are there, and I'm not. I've had this on another slide that I deleted. It is either the Ammonites or the Amorites. So look at the early verses. Tim, you're looking at it. Is it the Amorites or the Ammonites? Have you seen that? I don't know. Does it have an R in it or not? Where it mentions Moab, I think in verse 2, as I recall looking at the page there. And the very next verse said he made an alliance, and they came down against the Israelites. Now Ehud is a left-handed judge. Well, what do you remember about that king? Well, his name is Eglon. Now, you want a crazy way to remember it? Robin, do you think I'm insane because of the way I remember? It's not Robin Hood, and it's Ehud. What does a fat king look like? Well, it's a part of the story, by the way, and when I think of a fat king, I think of something that is egg-shaped. And so I remember the fat king, Eglon. I don't know if that will help you remember that at all or not. He's shaking his head no, just in absolute amazement. It's strange. I know it's strange, but there's some strange people in this church. Because some of you remember, you can remember the 6 names for elders, can you not? Elders must be pops. You know where that came from? Dan's inability to remember the 6 names in the Bible and taking the first letter of bishops, elders, pops, pastors, overseers, presbyters, and shepherds, okay? That's a be-pops way. They must have children, they must be pops. And so that's why I remember the names of the elders and everything. And I love my way of remembering it rather than your way of forgetting it. So, but Fat King, what's his name? Eglon. And listen, you tell this to a little 3-year-old boy, and he'll remember it forever. So here's the story. It is a really, really fascinating story. Ehud goes over, evidently with the tribute to give to King Eglon. He has a dagger. And the Bible describes that dagger and tells us exactly how long the dagger was. Can you look in that text there in chapter 3 and find the verse that tells us how long that dagger was? It was a cubit. What verse is that? 16. He's got, it's a cubit. How long is a cubit?
18 inches.
It is from here to here. And so whenever God told Noah to build the ark, how long was the ark? 300 cubits. Well, how are you going to measure? You don't have a tape measure. You don't have, and so it's just a matter literally of doing this sort of thing and putting down 18 inches and just keep coming, and you come this way, and that's 6 feet. And so if you're ever out trying to figure out how long something is, just lay down on the ground and just keep putting your 18 inches out or something like that. And that became a standard measurement among the Jews. And sometimes you'll see the cubit being 21 inches. And Tim Malbacher, I bet that your cubit is 2 feet long. Mine's about 17 inches. I've measured it just to see how close my arm became to a cubit. It's about 17 and a half actually. And so he's got a sword this long. Now then, he has a robe that he has on, evidently some sort of garment. And it's interesting the detail. Where does he keep the dagger? On his right side. And so he takes this dagger and he puts this dagger down in the right side of his garment. All right, see, I'll try to get I don't know if you can see this or not, I've got a pencil that I'm trying to stick down in there. And so I got my dagger here. But I'm left-handed. That's why I've got the dagger on the right side. On what? Right side. Right thigh. Okay, that's even better. That's even lower in everything. Okay, here's fat guy. Stand up. Ehud says, I got a message to give to you. And so I lean up here to give you this message. You can't see where my left hand is. I pull out my dagger, 18 inches long, and ram this dagger right. You don't have to die. We don't need to make this too good, okay? Sometimes these men of the church you cannot trust. I remember on 36th Street. I'm going to preach that sermon again, by the way, about the Foot Locker that I found that came from the 1860s. Anybody remember that sermon at all? You don't remember it. It was a part of the sermon. I wanted the deacons to bring up this Foot Locker as a part of the sermon. And so the song leader says, today's lesson is a parable, it never happened. And so, and I'm not going to tell you the lesson. I'm going to preach it again in this building, because if you don't remember it, you don't remember what I preached about last Sunday. I don't. But anyway, the deacons were going to bring it up right in the middle of my sermon, the start of my sermon, and they started to bring it up, and it was Jim Whiteside. I can't remember who the other deacon was, and they just started walking down the aisle carrying a Foot Locker, and I said, it's heavy. And Jim Whiteside bent over and grabbed his back. I will never forget that. He stole the sermon from me. Okay, so whatever deacon I get bring up the Foot Locker, please be aware of that. Sometimes you plan sermons, they don't work out quite as good as the others. But the amazing thing is, when he ran that big dagger inside, what's the king's name? Don't look at the board, just think of what is real fat. What would a big fat king look like? I've got it, he's pear-shaped. But but his name is not Peglon, his name is Eglon, and so they run this dagger right into his stomach. Now you would think you'd pull the dagger out. Wait a minute, how's it going to get out of that room? Well, first he tells the king, I've got a message for you. And everybody leaves the room. So it's me and Eglon in the room. We're there together. Well, how on earth am I going to get this dagger out? I mean, what am I going to do with this? Well, it's funny. He didn't need the dagger. You know what happened? He ran the dagger into the belly of big fat King Eglon, and he was so fat, his flesh covered over the handle of that dagger. I love the picture of that. You know, I have arrived at the point in my life that I could be Eglon too, you know. But I mean, it's just an amazing story. And he runs it in until that part, the hilt, or I think is the King James word. I'm not sure what the other word, what word you have in your translation. And he runs that in there, and the fat covers it up. So Ehud, being the soldier that he was, walks out and closes the door behind him. Now the people on the outside thinks, well, he's giving a message to the king. And Ehud is able to escape, while the men on the outside of the room where the king is are trying to decide, well, do we wake him up? They have no idea what's happened. Did your mother, when you were a kid, did she ever say, I'm going to have a nap now, and don't you dare wake me up? You ever have an experience like that whenever they, you don't wake up the king, and you don't wake up Geneva Jenkins whenever she says, I'm going to have a nap down now, don't you wake me up. And so they're outside, and I just, in my imagination, I just see, well, should we or should we not? Should we or should we not? And so whenever they discover it, whenever they discover what's happened, Ehud is gone. Look at the text and look carefully at what happens. Ehud flees all the way to what tribe does he flee? Maybe that will help if you can read that on the screen. There's the tribe of Ephraim. And so here's the people of God, and there's where Ephraim is. There's that Manasseh. There's Ephraim right there. And so Ehud leaves Moab and flees back up here among the tribe of Ephraim. You got to understand, they're not a nation. They're tribes. And they're all related, and they're all descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But they don't have the king. They don't have a standing army, as it were. And so Ehud goes back, I believe it says, to the mountains of Ephraim, doesn't it? Goes back to the mountains of Ephraim and sounds the trumpet. And the Bible talks about how they responded. And they go down against the Moabites. How many Moabites are killed? I believe the text says, doesn't it? What verse is that? Yeah, you see it? 10,000 Moabites are killed. You understand what a victory that is? Here's this new nation just been over the Promised Land. They've been there, for 50, 60, 70 years. I forget the exact number. I think you can figure out most of it and everything. And now, all of a sudden, they overthrow the Moabites. How'd that happen? Remember the cycle of the judges, the clock of the judges. How'd they get in this mess? Well, when they were faithful to God during the days of Othniel, they turned to idols. What'd God do? God allowed those Moabites to come up against them and to oppress them. That's at the 6 o'clock thing. They are oppressed. And they repent and call out to God, and God raises up a deliverer. Fascinating story. But the amazing thing is, here's the Moabites. They are an established nation and everything. They have a king already. You remember when Israel wants to have a king? And they go to Samuel and said, give us a king like what? Like the nations that are around us. Why? That he may go before us in battles. That's the work of the king. That's what he did. And so here they have, I won't say a standing army, but they're warriors, and the Israelites are not. And I think about, as I think I mentioned this last Wednesday night, the Minutemen soldiers in American history, when Paul Revere's and others would say, whoever those folks are that are coming, the whats are coming, and since we have some individuals here who come from that commonwealth of whatever's name we will not call, but you remember what Paul Revere said. And so the word goes out, and the army comes down, and God takes this nothing nation and gives them a mighty victory. We're going to talk about Gideon. You're talking about Gideon. How many soldiers did he have? 300. And then the initial part of the battle, they killed 120,000. That builds your faith? You'd think they would really be faithful for a long time, and so there is that response in relationship to that battle, and when they have that response, 10,000 Moabites. And I put men of valor. I don't think that's in the text. I probably made that up. But or maybe it does say men of valor, does it? And so here these brave men and a nothing army, with the help of God, amazed the nations around them. Isn't that what God will do for us? How did they describe those apostles? Ignorant, unlearned. It's rather amazing. Individuals who want to deny the authenticity of the Bible come to that word ignorant, and they've in one translation they put illiterate. Well, if they're illiterate, how could Peter write 1st and 2nd Peter, and how could John write 5 books of the Bible? And they behold the boldness of Peter and John, and they're illiterate. And so you can't trust the Bible anyway. In one place it says they're illiterate, and that's not what it says. It says they're unlearned. You know, in fact, you may not have a PhD. Doesn't mean you're dumb. It means you're unlearned. And I think it's remarkable that so many of the discoveries that have been made in American history have been made by unlearned people. Booker T. Washington, there's an unlearned individual, turned the world upside down with the discoveries that he made. And so, look at that. Victory was such that for 80 years they had peace. And so when you think of the clock of the judges, don't necessarily see it just running and running. Sometimes there are pauses where it stops. Let's look at Shamgar. What do we know about Shamgar? Well, we know he fits in the cycle of the judges. And so after that victory there, God raises up Shamgar, and his name means named a stranger. I don't even know what that means. What does yours say? Named a stranger is what I have. But there's 2 verses devoted to him? I think it's 2 verses he gets. And the Bible says after this, God raised up this man by the name of Shamgar, and he delivered the Israelites from the Philistines. I don't think we have that map showing where the Philistines are, but what weapon did he have? An ox goad. And we don't have a clue what an ox goad is. Is it which bone in an ox is the goad bone? It's not a bone. That we've got Samson. He used the jawbone of a donkey. When you're driving oxen, sometimes they'd be stubborn and would not be working as hard as you wanted to. So that farmer, walking behind the plow, as it were, perhaps maybe a wagon, but more you can see it better, see him against the plow, and he's walking behind the plow, and the oxen's not wanting to go, and so they would have a stick. It was pointed on the end. And they would take that stick and hit the thigh of that oxen, hit that oxen's rear leg in some place. And the ox would obviously try to get away from that stick, and that stick was called a goad, G-O-A-D. And so if you want to know how to remember it, it is that stick that made the ox goad. And so it's an ox goad. Now, I'll tell you the significance of that. Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? You know that story? On the road to Damascus. He's going up to Damascus to kill the Christians. And the old King James says, it's hard for you to kick against, and the word there is not goad. The King James has the word prick, because that's what that stick did. It would prick them in their legs. Now, if you were an ox, or if you can envision what might happen if a goad stick sticks in your leg, what's your leg going to do? It's going to kick. But wait, who's going to get hurt? The ox. Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? When I read that as a child, I thought, I'm hurting so much by what you're doing. Well, he was. But the statement is, it's hard for you when you're kicking backwards. When you're kicking against the goad stick, it's hard for you. Not hard. He's not saying you're hurting me. I mean, when I used to read that as a child and everything, it's hurting me every time you kick against the. No, guess who you're hurting? You're hurting yourself. And that's what sin does. And that's what rebellion against God does. And you think about it in your own life, the guilt that you have after you've gone against God. And did Saul have much guilt about persecuting the Christians? He calls himself the chief of sinners. In his trial, he said, I was consenting unto the death, and I fought against this. And his conscience is there. If you'll read that, he's greatly concerned about his actions in the past. I'm chief of sinners. Not that I'm not forgiven, but I'm chief of sinners. Shamgar. 2 verses. But he's not the shortest named in foreign reference to verses of the judges. Names of those first 3 judges: Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar. Now, next week, I'm going to be out of town speaking down at the church in West Broward. They have that summer series like we used to have kickoff June, kickstart your summer in June, and they do the same thing down there, except they run it for like 3 months. And Josh and David had already been down there, and so I got to go next week. We have this great learned scholar. We've invited one of the most brilliant minds that you could ever imagine to be here next week. But he could not make it. So we're going to let Bill Jr. teach this class. Those who've been in the class know Bill's a great teacher. And so let's be here next week. We'll be talking the 4th judge, Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah. And then one after that, 300 men in his army, Gideon. Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, Gideon. Let's try to learn those judges. Thank you very much.